It's been a while since we had a successful, or I guess even attempted murder of someone associated with Russia under sketchy circumstances. And by a while, I mean, it's been a few months, I guess. And the BBC is now reporting that a nerve agent was used to try to kill a former Russian spy and his daughter. Sergei Skripal was a Russian military intelligence officer who was sentenced to 13 years in Russian prison for passing intelligence to some British intelligence agents, MI6 agents, from the UK, in the UK. And he was eventually released by Moscow a few years ago in 2010 in exchange for 10 Russian spies that had previously been arrested by the FBI. And Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia Skripal were found unconscious in the UK over the weekend, and they still remain in critical condition as of just a few hours ago. The police officer who was the first responder to the scene is also in critical condition because the poison used is very, very deadly. It's a nerve agent which is so toxic that it can stop the nervous system from working properly or at all when it succeeds in killing people. It shuts down basic bodily functions. It often enters through the nose or mouth, but it can also go in through the eyes or even be absorbed through the skin. And this is being considered sort of a parallel incident to when former Russian spy Alexander Litvinenko was poisoned in London about 12 years ago, which was later determined to have been approved by Vladimir Putin personally. And even the use of a nerve agent like this tells us a lot, because if you're part of a gang, if you're a street criminal, even mafias, right? They don't typically have the means to make nerve agents or even to get them. Usually these nerve agents come from labs that are often directly tied into governments. So immediately, looking at the background of Sergei Skripal and looking at the mechanism that was used, the focus becomes Russia here. And Russia also has a track record of using these types of poisons. They have a sort of more general track record of assassinating political enemies and dissidents. And Sergei Skripal, if you look at his background, there's some pretty specific motive there, right? He was providing information to British intelligence, and he was formerly imprisoned, previously imprisoned by Russia, and there's sort of very clear motive here. And every time this happens, there's this question of why now, right? Like, why now, given that this guy has been out of prison for 8 years, living in the UK? Why would Russia go after him now? That's also actually a calling card of the Russians. A long time can go by. You might think that maybe they've forgotten, or you know that they don't forget, and thus you're living these entire 8 years in fear, and then the poison shows up. And this is actually one of the more sinister cases because usually Russia will only go after the person themselves. This time his daughter also is in critical condition, and we don't know whether she was sort of collateral damage because these nerve agents are so deadly, or whether she was actually targeted by the poisoner. But even if she was collateral damage, the fact that this was done with no regard for possible collateral damage is pretty gross. And something else for the Russia deniers here, which there will no doubt be many of in the current climate, Matt Tate pointed out on Twitter that when you use a poison like this, you're kind of deliberately using it so that it will be known who did it, right? He tweeted, anyone can fall off a balcony or get shot in the street, but using isotopes that only occur in specific reactors, or VX that only a few nation states have labs that can make, isn't an accident. It's messaging. You betray us, we kill you, and your Western handlers won't save you. Now, the only problem with that, of course, is that you can make it so that anybody who wants to frame someone who regularly uses this stuff would be able to pretty easily do it by using the poison that you're known to use. But again, these are not exactly poisons that you can get over the counter, or whatever the equivalent would be to an over-the-counter poison. These are only obtainable from a very limited number of specific places that are able to produce this stuff. You use these poisons to send a message, right? If they wanted this, whoever it was, to look like a suicide, they could have. Sometimes that's still suspicious. Like, we've reported on suspicious suicides that don't really seem to be suicides, but they could have done it. If they wanted it to look like a simple murder, maybe a robbery gone wrong, they could have made an attempt to do that. They didn't, right? They actually chose to use the nerve gas. And by the way, meanwhile, Are you as excited as I am for World Cup soccer action in Russia starting in just a few months?
Oh, I forgot about that.
It's disgusting. It's disgusting that the World Cup is actually going to be in Russia, a country that not only has meddled in our elections and has tried to circumvent and impact, destabilize democracy in the United States so many times, but even just the corruption to get the World Cup. I mean, it is all so disgusting. And if it weren't for the fact that I love World Cup soccer, I would be boycotting the entire thing.
And I really hope that you don't attend because it's going to get
no.
really hard to host the David Pakman show if
From
you're
Russia?
poisoned
Yeah.
and you have 50 stab wounds in your back.
So listen, I was recently talking to former producer Lewis. How much time do I have? Not that much. I'll tell this very quickly. I was talking to former producer Lewis, and he has a plan in late summer to go to St. Petersburg because you can enter, if you enter from like one of the Scandinavian countries, you can get in for 3 days without needing a visa that you would normally need, I think, to go from the US. And he said, you should come and meet up. And I know that North Korea, I would not want to go to, even though I would find it fascinating just because of the coverage from the program. I'd be worried that I'd be on some list.
Right.
I kind of think I'd be worried about the same thing in Russia at this point. I really do. And I don't know if that's irrational, but I would hesitate to fly to Russia at this point or to go in.
If something happened to you, it would be a major story. But
that's true.
That's not really what you're thinking about at the
No,
time.
you know what? I know any publicity is good publicity, but ending up in some kind of Russian prison is not really the publicity that I'm looking for at
Could be good for the
this
show.
point. Could be great for the show, but we'd have to find someone else to host the show that would benefit from me ending up in a Russian prison. And speaking of which, not to go Russia overload on you, next is the conclusion to our piece on what we know so far about the Trump-Russia story. Today's program is made possible in part by Futur, which is a social forecasting game for your phone where players come together and compete with each other to predict future events. You go on the app, find a future event you feel confident enough about to make a prediction, and make a bet on the outcome that you think will happen using the app's in-game fake currency. If your prediction is right, you're rewarded with more points. You can compete with others who are making their own prediction to see who is the best forecaster. There's no real-world money or cryptocurrency involved. The fun of Futur is interacting with others and showing the world your skills at predicting the future. Will Democrats take the White House this year? Will Trump run for re-election? Will Trump ever build the wall? You can go ahead and make your predictions, show off your forecasting skills, and there are also monthly competitions and prizes for top forecasters. And I'm on Futur. You can wager on my predictions. You can also browse the politics category for lots of interesting questions. Go to futur.com to sign up and make forecasts. It's free. It's on Android and iOS as well as on web browsers, and it's spelled FUTUUR.com.